Welcome everyone. My name is Stephen and I'm going to be your moderator this evening. I'm glad to have you here. I'm really excited to welcome and introduce Leon Reynolds, Senior Equipment Service Technician with Henry Schein, along with Daniel Molina, Technical Service Manager with Henry Schein, as our speakers tonight. So together they're going to discuss everything you need to know about the mechanical room, plus the steps you should take to ensure that failures don't happen to you. So just before I hand over to them and we get started, I'd just like to take a moment to take care of a couple of points of housekeeping. Firstly, if you have a question at any point during the presentation, please go ahead and type it in the box labeled "Have a question," and we'll do our best to answer all of your questions. Secondly, this webinar is sponsored by A-dec. And last, CE is not available for this webinar live or on demand. So welcome, Leon and Daniel. I'm going to pass it on over to you guys now.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. Again, my name is Daniel Molina. I'm the Technical Service Manager for Henry Schein Dental. I'm joined with Leon Reynolds out of Austin, Texas. He is our senior technician down there. Together, we have many years of service in the field, also in the classroom, working with a lot of technicians, just training, further education for them as well. So that being said, we're excited that you've joined us and take time out of your, I'm sure, busy evening and to hear what we have to share with you today. Our goal is that you walk away from this webinar knowing just a little bit more about your mechanical room. Hopefully we can answer those tough questions for you. We're excited to do that and share what we've gathered over the years and be able to share that with you. So today we will be going through, first we're going to define each piece of equipment, how it works, how to maintain it. Along the way, we will point out some of the tips and tricks that will also help you with the maintenance routines that you can also implement with your teams that hopefully can prolong the life of your equipment with the hopes of also reducing any downtime in case something like that were to happen, which we never want to, right? So, but again, I'd like to point out that any time during this webinar, if you have any questions, please feel free to answer them down there on I Have a Question. Me and Leon will do our best during the presentation to answer those. If we find that it's something that we would like to share with the group, maybe in a more in-depth, we will go ahead and do so at the end of the presentation during the Q&A process as well. So with that being said, I will go ahead and start our presentation here. Let me move some stuff around. So our agenda today, overview, is knowing my equipment. Like I said, we're going to go over compressors, vacuums, and accessories. We're also going to touch on some daily, some weekly, monthly, quarterly, and some yearly maintenance that each of your pieces of equipment needs to work properly. Also, we're going to touch on some replace versus repair. We're hopefully going to answer some of those tough questions and some of the inevitable things that you have to do as an owner of your practice and over the life of your practice and have to change out your equipment. And then at the end, we're going to go and leave some time for some Q&A as well. So again, your practice is your mechanical room is the heart and lungs of your practice. This is vital to your practice, keeping it up and running. Without these two things in your mechanical room, your compressor and your vacuum, you are dead in the water and you're not able to operate. So we've tagged these as the heart and lungs, which is appropriate for the mechanical room. You're pumping air, you're sucking the fluids from your vacuum system, that sort of thing. So it's very crucial that we pay attention to our mechanical rooms, we understand it, we understand the maintenance, and not only you, but your team as well. It's a team effort. It shouldn't be always relied on by one person. It should be relied on as a team to be able to know the mechanical room. I know many people out there have admitted the guilt of just walking by the mechanical room day in and day out and not knowing what's in there. And hopefully after this, we can spread some more knowledge that you feel comfortable to go in that mechanical room and also train your team and help them. And also we're there in the future too if you have any questions as well. So with that said, I will go ahead and kick this off to Leon, who's going to describe the differences between dry vac and wet ring vac. And again, this is an overview, not knowing what type of equipment you have, but we're displaying some of the pieces of equipment that are out there, some of the new pieces of equipment that are out there. And I'll kick it off to you, Leon.
Thank you, sir. Telling the difference between your wet ring, these several that you see on the side here, versus your dry vac, which is the ones on the left there. The first one is your wet ring is going to have a water line going directly to it. They utilize water to create suction in your operatories, and without it, they just cannot create suction. Your dry vac, however, some of them do use oil to create suction. It's still considered a dry vac, and it won't necessarily have a water line going to it itself. It will be going to a storage tank simply for the washout cycle. The wet ring vacs normally have a smaller footprint. You can see the ones on the right. They're not very big, so they don't take up very much room in your mechanical room compared to the ones on the left that actually they have a larger footprint, and they always have a tank associated with them. You'll be able to tell it's anywhere from a 10 to 40 gallon tank if you have a dry vac, and if you have a wet ring vac, there is no tank. Normally that comes straight from the operatories into an amalgam separator, through into the pump, and then into a drain. Your dry vacs all require an outdoor exhaust because a lot of the gases that are coming from the oil cavity from the operatories are going into that tank, and it has to exhaust outside the mechanical room, because you really don't want that venting inside the mechanical room where your compressor, where your compressors are. The dry vacuum considers one user equal to one HVE or a doctor, or 5 saliva ejectors or hygienist. Wet ring considers one user 1 HVE or doctor, or 2 saliva ejectors or hygienists. Now, a lot of that changed post-COVID when hygiene was starting to add ISO lights or ISO dries. You have to consider those as being a user. So if post-COVID, say 2020, late 2019, when you came back and you didn't change anything in your mechanical room, yet you added a bunch of suction lines, added HVEs to hygiene rooms, stuff like that, and you're having a lower suction now, there's a reason behind it. That's pretty much it. Telling the difference between the wet and the dry. I mean, there's a lot of similarities, and there's a lot of, I would say the number one would be the water line going into the pump for your wet ring. It cannot create suction without it. We're going to move on to telling the difference between your compressors. Compressors, they cycle on and off. They don't run constantly like your vacuums. You'll see cylinder heads. These are what I'm calling cylinder heads. The one on the top, you can't see the cylinder heads, but they are in there. They'll build up anywhere from 100 to 115 psi, and then they'll cut off. Only time that they're normally going to run 100% of the time is if there's an issue. All of them, once they hit that 100 to 115, they cycle off, is what I call it, and then they don't run until it drops back down to 80 to 86. We'll touch more about that here in the slides coming up, but they'll have a smaller line going to the wall. There's a lot going on with your vacuums. There's lines coming from your operatory to your amalgam separator to your vacuum. The compressor is only going to have one line from it to the wall. That's supplying air pressure to your entire office. Users, normally they just count doctors and hygienists, but you also have to take into consideration some milling units, lab equipment, stuff like that. So if you have a 3-op office and you're running a 3 to 5 user, and you add say a certain type of milling unit that is anywhere from 1 to 2 or 3 users, you may be overworking your compressor. When you're calling about an emergency compressor down, just keep in mind that if you lose drive air to your handpiece, that's going to be your compressor. If you lose suction to the oral cavity or to your isolite or your saliva ejector, HVE, stuff like that, that's going to be a vacuum. Know the difference between the two of them. It will help the technician on the way there in your emergency to kind of pre-troubleshoot any issues that you may have. A lot of the compressors, you're able to shut down one head and run an office on the other head just for a short period of time. That's something that Henry Schein's Tech Advisor line can help you do over the phone in some cases. Other cases, that's actually a technician coming out and bypassing a head or two. Just remember that they do cycle on and off. If they do run off, if they're running constantly and you never hear them kick off during the course of a day, there's an issue. We're going to pass that on to Daniel. I believe you're on the next slide, correct?
Yeah, thanks, Leon. And again, some of this may be reviewed, but we do want to touch on the differences. And now we'll get into a little bit more in depth of some of the maintenance and some of the things to look for, in which we titled "Look, Fill, Listen, and Replace." And when we say replace, not your equipment, it's more of the replaceable parts, maintenance parts, that sort of thing too. So your compressor, again, is the heart and lungs of your practice. You take care of it, it takes care of you, it breathes life into your practice. So preach that with your staff, make sure they understand it, make sure they're taking care of it. Follow some of these tips and tricks here that we have. So when your compressor is working properly, make it a point that you and your staff understand what your compressor should sound like normally, right? You want to be able to walk by it, and if someone were to hear something a little off, maybe they'll set off a signal that you mention it to you or your staff and say, hey, listen for this. If he sounds a little different, mention it. Let's talk about it. Let's see what it is. Let's bring in a service technician to take a deeper look at it. So it can mean the difference in replacing a head or just a maintenance part. So keep that in mind. It's super important. Maybe nothing sometimes, but it may just be a noise. Shut your compressor down each night. Your practice should be airtight. Not all of them are. We have a lot of equipment in the office that maybe have a small leak on it, whether it's a blow tip on there or a handpiece, something's leaking a little bit of air. If you leave that compressor on overnight, that compressor is going to cycle on and off every hour. And it's just going to add hours to your compressor. So super important, shut it down. I'm sure most of you are anyway, but again, just make it a point that everybody does shut it down. Occasionally, you want to carefully, without touching the heads, go in there and just hover around the top of the heads, see if they're warm. If you feel around it and you notice that one of the heads is not warm, it's a good indication that it's not working. Sometimes it's hard to tell because if you hear one head, it kind of sounds like both. So it's a good way to just do that and kind of feel around. And again, don't touch it. Just kind of feel around and see if you feel that heat on there. Some of the newer units will give you warning signals. Some of the newer units that are out, they'll actually blink. They'll give you a code, whether it's a remote panel, that sort of thing. So super easy. Again, if you may have an older compressor, you're going to have to do it the old-fashioned way and really check it out that way. So all manufacturers recommend cleaning the compressor. I know this seems, go in there with a rag and a damp rag and wipe it down. It serves two purposes, right? We're cleaning our equipment. We're making sure that it's nice and proper. The other thing is you're getting your hands on it. You're getting your eyes on it, and you're looking to see if there's anything wrong with that unit. You're also looking for codes or blinking lights or that sort of thing. So it's a good idea to go in there, clean it up. Not only that, it's easier, it prolongs the life of your equipment. You're keeping the dust away from it, everything else, and you're keeping some eyes on it again. So good idea to keep it clean. Also, check your compressor's air pressure settings by making sure that it starts and stops per your manufacturer's recommended settings, which is usually 80 to 100, plus or minus 5 to 10 psi on either end. This will ensure that you're getting enough pressure, right? You want to make sure you get enough pressure to your delivery systems, and like Leon, everything else, you want to make sure it's right. That way, when your service technician comes in, you can mention it and say, hey, we need to take a look at this, and did I outdo my compressor at this point? Do I need to upgrade, or do I need to adjust? Just check it out, right? So it will kick on at 80 and it shuts off at 100, so give or take. If you feel that your compressor is continuously running, again, this could be due to an open air line in your room, like we talked about earlier, a leak in your compressor. This can quickly overheat your unit and cause major issues moving forward. And not only that, you're adding hours to your unit unnecessarily. So make sure you're listening for those sort of things. Get familiar with your dryness indicator, your moisture indicator on your compressor as well. if you're blue is good, pink is bad as far as compressors. And if you see that it's pink, you're going to need to call for some service because you may be due for maintenance at that point because you do have moisture in your lines. So keep a tab on that. Make sure you're looking when you're wiping down, cleaning it. You're looking for that pink tag, right? It's just a small viewing window on most of the units. When doing a routine check, know where your intake filters are as well. Some of them are right on the head. Some of the new units have a little flip out where you can get to them, that sort of thing. But the ones on the heads, you're going to want to make sure to push them down, make sure they're seated right into those heads. Those should be routinely maintained, which we'll go over in the next few slides as well as far as the maintenance. But take a look at those as well. Sorry, let's track it. Also, for your external intake, make sure that's hooked up as well. You have your external intake coming from outside. This is extremely important that you're not sucking in potentially bad air from inside your room, especially if you have an open drain and you do take in nitrous oxide from some of the operatories. You don't want to get that into your lines, right? So make sure if you have an open drain, your intake is connected. It didn't get pulled off, whether it bumped into it, something happened, or just hopefully just didn't fall off. But keep an eye on for that as well. You want to make sure we have an external line. We'll also go into more depth about the exhaust and intake lines for your vacuum compressor. Again, it's extremely important that if you have an open drain from the outside, that you're getting outside fresh air. An open drain can push nitrous and dirty air from the vacuums into your lines. Another reason could be that don't use your storage room. Don't use your mechanical room as a storage room, right? There could be harmful, flammable chemicals in there. If something were to spill, you don't want to be sucking that into your compressor. Whether it's moisture, whether it's fumes, that sort of thing. It could be extremely dangerous if it's flammable, sucking that into your compressor, that sort of thing. So make sure we're not using the mechanical room as a storage room. Dining offices, sometimes that's the room that gets sacrificed a little bit, but make sure you give your room, mechanical room, enough space, especially if you're designing one, and not use it as a storage closet. If you've added any equipment to your practice, make sure you have a service tech come in and check your voltage, or if you feel comfortable enough with it with a meter, check your voltage on there and make sure it meets your manufacturer's recommended settings. Things can change. Whether a building moved in next door to you, if you're in a strip mall, if a restaurant moved in next door, they're going to be pulling a lot of heavy electricity. So that can affect your compressor as well, your equipment. So make sure you're checking that voltage and you're still within the manufacturer's settings too. So one quick tip, we as a service tech, I know me and Leon have done this a million times, but you grab a mirror, get your air line, set your rheostat, and press that air right onto your mirror. Make sure you don't have any moisture. This can be done in the beginning of the day. If you do see moisture, you're going to need to call for some service because maybe that, I guarantee your moisture indicator is going to be pink, right? So you want to make sure you check, see there's no moisture in there. This can affect everything, crowns, everything throughout the day. You don't want any of that moisture, so make sure you're checking that. And we will be moving on to vacuums, which I'll hand it off to Leon as well.
I do want to thank you, Daniel. I do want to add a little something there to Daniel's last tip. Make sure that you're not using the air water syringe. Those pesky air water tips can cause a lot of problems and have water in the air, and it's simply just a air water tip O-ring. So make sure you're using the handpiece tubing that you're using for your drills and your whatever you're using. Use your handpiece tube. On your vacuum, look, fill, and listen, and replace. Your vacuum is the heart of your practice, and it will keep everything pumping and flowing. Here are some tips and what to do and look for. Remember, on a wet seal vacuum, it's going to have a smaller footprint, and it's going to have a water line going to the pump. So at the start of the day, always turn the water on before you turn on the unit. This will prevent any damage to your unit. I've actually seen these turned on without the water going to it, and they just kind of melt down or blow off a line simply because of the heat expansion in there. The water does two things. It creates a suction, and it also cools the housing. Most of these are made out of brass anymore. It dissipates heat really well, but it counts on that water to cool that pump down at the same time. On a wet-dry, on both wet and dry, like your compressor, when the vacuum is working properly, make it a point that you and your staff understand what it normally sounds like. A high-pitch whistle could be conducive to a vacuum leak, squealing through a cracked tank. Water leaks don't really make a lot of sounds. They just make a mess, right? So you'll be able to see these on your wet rings, sometimes when they're running, sometimes when they're off. That negative pressure in those lines on your water leaks, once it relaxes, then that's when you'll 9 times out of 10 see the leak. On a wet and a dry back, you're going to make sure to shut your vacuum down each night, of course, and then also on long periods of use, like lunch, anything over 15 minutes. This will allow your unit to cool off and save water if you're using a wet ring. Remember, the wet ring vacuums don't idle down like VFDs on dry vacs. So a VFD was put into use several years ago, and it's a variable frequency drive. And what that does is it's like your gas pedal in your car. The faster you want to go, the further you push it. It ramps up and down depending on how many users open, say, an HVE or saliva ejector. So it's a greener way to utilize your electricity, to cut down on those electrical costs. It only idles up when you're using it the most. On a wet and a dry vac, you're going to inspect your units, and we recommend you clean them. Daniel alluded to that earlier. A lot of the reason for that is all of these units, when you look at them, they have cooling fins made into the housings and the castings of these, whether it be aluminum, cast iron, whatever materials that the manufacturer's using, and they're there for a purpose. They're there to catch the airflow as it moves across the pumps to cool them. If you have, they're clogged with dust and debris, or a ceiling tile may have collapsed and is creating a restriction of the airflow around that vacuum pump or that compressor head, it can cause damage to your unit. They're there to cool that head in a certain ambient temperature, and we'll touch more on that here shortly. Wet and dry vacs, during your inspections, look for cracked or collapsed or kinked lines, and or leaking collection tanks. The collection tanks on your dry vacs, most of them are white, some of them are not. They're really easy to find cracks on the white tank because the negative pressure is going to suck all the dust out of the air, and it's going to actually build up in that crack, and it'll show up like a pin mark. I haven't really ever seen, I would say, maybe one cracked metal tank, but that was showing a water leak when the vacuum was off. On a wet and a dry vac, if you have an open drain, make sure it's clear of anything that's fallen down, like getting out of your biohazard bag or gloves or anything that's being stored in there. Make sure it's free of any debris, and make sure that the drain hose is secured above it. Now, an open floor drain will just be like in a mop sink or something, and you'll see a couple lines going to it, some of them from your backflow preventers, stuff that's on the wall in there. They're all going to have what they call an air gap. You want to make sure there's an air gap between your drain hose on your vacuum and that floor drain, just so it doesn't back up or create an overflow. These will get a little smelly. You may take a cupful of bleach and put down there once a month. That'll reduce the smell. If you're staying on top of your flushing of the system, that'll help a ton. Your wet ring vacs are gonna pump water down them while they're running, clean or dirty. Your dry vacs are only gonna to empty when there's no negative pressure. So once your vacuum's shut off, a couple seconds after, and it releases the check valve underneath, then it drains. So you have more apt of a smell on a dry vac than you do on a wet vac. So bleach will help you out on that. Wet and dry vacs, your vacuum suction will be factory set at 8 inches. That's pretty much across the board. That's a standard, and that's ideal for general dentistry. Some manufacturers will recommend that you adjust it up to 11 inches of mercury. That'll give you a little bit more suction. If you see that your unit is below 8 inches of mercury, and it doesn't go any higher or drops off when you start opening HVEs and saliva ejectors, maintenance may be needed. Your wet ring backs, your intake solid collector will need to be checked or changed weekly if you see that it's full. When replacing the canister, it's good to put a little water on that O-ring to keep it from popping out. A lot of times you can see them if they popped out and they're not sealing. You'll see a lot of bubbles in there after you replace it with everything shut off, of course. Now, these may change in your area. Say that you take an old pump out and put a new pump in, and it's stronger suction. You may start cleaning your lines more than you knew. I've actually seen the solids collector filter. I'd had to change one 3 times to get suction because they would clog immediately after turning the vacuum on. So make sure you're keeping an eye on the inside of that screen of those, because they fill up from the inside out. So you physically have to pull it off and look down on the inside. Wet and dry vacs. Some units are equipped with a vacuum relief filter. This is just simply a little foam filter that's stuck in there that collects dust and debris that keeps it from getting into your vacuum breaker, which creates your negative pressure on these tanks for the dry vacs and the negative pressure on your wet vac as well. Make sure that it's not clogged or has fallen off. This will absolutely be checked by the Henry Schein service technician on your annual maintenance. But it's a good idea to know where it's at and to make sure it's keeping that debris out of your vacuum breaker. On some dry vacs, use oil. Even though we consider it a dry vac, it's still using oil to create suction. Make sure you're looking in the sight glass or view window at the oil level and know where that's at. Older units have alarms. Newer units don't have alarms. Daniel alluded to the blinking light on the low voltage panel that you turn on every morning and turn off every night. A lot of your vacuums out there across the board will tell you if there's something wrong. Yellow light, a blue light. There's so many different ways that it's trying to communicate to you to tell you there's an issue. Dry vacs, it's always a good idea to have extra belt on hand. So if your Henry Schein tech comes in and changes your belt, ask for the old one. Most of us will zip tie it to the vacuum to where it's handy in case one breaks. It doesn't necessarily need to be changed every year, but it needs to be checked and adjusted every year, at least every year. It's always better to have one on hand when you need it than not have one at all, right? Moving on to the let me see. I missed the quick tip. Sorry about that. On dry vacs, never close drain line to drain. This will cause a backup in your system. A lot of the systems a lot of the dry vac tanks out there have what they call a gate valve, and it's just a little white handled T that it should be pulled out instead of pushed in. That's for service only. Your service technician can explain to you more on why that's there for us to service it as a technician. But I've seen these things get bumped because, there's the cleaning crew has a trash can or a mop bucket in there, and they just pushed it up against it, shut it, and now it has no way to drain that tank. So make absolutely sure that you have a good clearance around that thing. A lot of the manufacturers are putting safeties in them now so they can't be closed without removing the safety. But there's some older ones out there that doesn't have the safety installed, and they do get closed. So they will cause a backup.
Awesome. Thanks, Leon. Real life experiences that we've seen in the field, right?
Right.
All right. So much like the vacuum compressor, we're going to jump into mechanical room accessories. Just kind of go over each one, define what they are, and show you a few examples of what we've seen. And then we're going to get, again, into later on, especially like the water control valves too. So amalgam separators, most of you have these. I think they're required in almost every state now, it seems like. So quite simply, an amalgam separator is a mercury collection device that sits in line between the operatory and vacuum pump. Dental wastewater flows through the vacuum line and passes through the amalgam separator where teeth fragments, dental amalgam, and mercury are separated and collected. The filtered water continues to flow through while heavy waste and sediment is stored. When the container reaches the full line or 12 months, whichever comes first, you got to replace that filter. Super important. We'll go into that in more detail, but a lot of our offices think, it's not full. It's been there 2 years. It's great. You've got to replace it. That's a quick way that they'll shut down your office if they come and inspect it, that sort of thing. So make sure it does have the date on there with Sharpie and the expiration date. That way you can keep on tabs with that and also keep one on hand. Control panels. These have evolved considerably over the years. We've talked about blinking lights, that sort of thing. We've seen many of them that, when you see a blinking light, something's going off, that's not lit, they're off. Now we've got control panels that actually tell you what's going on, when maintenance is due, if there's something wrong with your unit, everything there is to know about your compressor or vacuum. So they're evolving. So, there's the older ones and there's a newer one. So it's a lot better, but it still doesn't take away from, going in your mechanical room and seeing things, but it is a peace of mind to have that in case you have a busy day and you don't have the chance to get in there. You do have that peace of mind of having those nice control panels that are out there now. Remote control water valves. These control the water to all your operatories. Depending how they plumbed your office, it may be sectioned off just for the dental part of it. I've seen to where that they've, allowed it to still flow water into your bathrooms, your kitchens, and that sort of thing. Some of you may have seen these in there that they have a blue filter, or now some of the newer ones that actually have a viewing clear glass, plastic, or what have you. Really nice to have. These take out anything from dirt, scale, fine sediment, rust, and other contaminants that are harmful to your equipment that may get passed. So this is probably the number one thing that I see that never gets replaced as far as filters. Make sure that you keep one on hand. You're getting them replaced. Some may not have a filter. You can actually order them without it. So, but if you do have it, make sure you're replacing it. You may be surprised in the water pressure that you get after doing so. So, buck boost. A lot of practice have never heard of the buck boost, but like I talked about earlier, if they open a restaurant next door to your practice, lucky you, right? But it's going to suck up a lot of electricity, right? And it may drop your. So what we do is we install a buck boost, which most of the time we recommend, we put on the order anyway that you have these. This will either, it's a buck boost. It either bucks the electricity or boosts it, right? So it bucks it down, boosts it up. So if you're not hitting that manufacturer range, this will do it. Your licensed electrician will wire it accordingly and then drop down the voltage or boost it up so that way you meet that mark. Super important that you're hitting that voltage mark. It'll either make your compressor or vacuum work harder or not hard enough and really just cause a lot of damage to it and shorten the lifespan of it. So again, if a technician goes in there to work on something, they should be checking your voltage, but you can also ask them, hey, a special request, if you're in my op, can you go to my mechanical room and check all my voltage so that way I'm on top of it. So also out there, we talk about having room in your mechanical rooms. A lot of manufacturers have utility racks, stack racks, that sort of thing. So if you have everything kind of laid out, get a stack rack, stack things up. That way it gives you a little bit more room, a little bit more efficiency for your maintenance tech to go in there and work on, that sort of thing. A lot of the new stuff out there is super clean, stackable. You can see some of the pictures we showed earlier, really nice and clean. So, if you don't have those and you're in this situation where you have stackable stuff that's laid out, you may need a stack rack. If not, looking to see what else is out there. So I will move on to the next slide. So again, water shutoff. I touched a little bit on it. You want to shut this down at the end of each day. This is super critical. Make sure your remote panel in your hallway, wherever you shut your water vacuum compressor down, it's going to have water, right? This is what it shuts down. This shuts off the water to your practice, right? If you don't have one, if you don't have a remote switch to it, or if it's manual, you can actually go in there. If it's going to be a long weekend or a long holiday, something, you can go in there and shut these valves off. Just remember, anything in line with the pipe, if the turn-off handle is in line with it, that means water's flowing. Anytime it is crossing the pipe, that means it's off, right? So anything crossing the pipe is off. Anything along with the pipe, along with the flow, is on. So if you're bypassing this filter, You want to shut those two off and open the top one, and it'll avoid the whole filter altogether. It's also a quick way to see if maybe your filter is clogged, right? You can bypass that filter and go straight bore right through it. And if it increases the water pressure, you need to get a water filter immediately and change that out. So again, shut this off at night. You never know. You never know when you're going to get a leak. I mean, we've seen it a lot. I wish I could say they're preventable, but you just never know. Whether it's older equipment, a patient steps on your J box and it pinches a line, pulls it. You just never know. We've seen it all. So if it happens during the day, you're going to see a water leak, right? So it's pretty minimal. But at night, we've seen some bad situations. So do yourself a favor. If you don't have a water shut-off valve, look into getting one. They're worth a peace of mind to have. So, Leon, I will hand it over to you on the probably everybody's favorite subject, amalgam separators. So.
Absolutely. So in July 2017, this law was passed, but you only had to be compliant in July 2020. Most general dentistries that had them before 2020, there was some exceptions. You don't want to skip cleaning your lines you don't want to skip cleaning your lines if only hygiene is running that day. Prophy pumice left in the lines overnight can dry up and clog your lines. The actual prophy pumice separates from the paste that is used, and it collects in the bottom of your filter. You'll actually see in high hygiene offices, you'll actually see this filter fill up a lot faster. It not only catches the amalgam, but it also catches the prophy pumice. Inspect your filter and top canister weekly. Use a flashlight on the backside of your filter to see the sediment clearly. You can see on all amalgam separators, it will have on the filter, the bottom section, it will have a full line. Everybody has a phone in their pocket nowadays. Turn the flashlight on, put it on the backside of the canister, and you'll be able to see that sediment line. Ensure that the solids are below the full line on the filter. If close, consider changing the filter to avoid any issues. I've seen these get neglected and backed up into the upper canister, which is this upper chamber. Let me turn my pointer on. I should have had that on. But this upper chamber here, that can be an issue where it backs up into the wall, and then you start to lose suction and create a bigger issue than needed. Look for any cracks in the top canister. This is not typical, but if the system is clogged, it will be seen as a crack. If you see a crack in this upper canister, you'll see bubbles. It'll be bubbling even more than likely with all the HVEs off. More than likely, it'll bubble even with a couple on, actually. Check to see if the pins, these bottom two pins on here, are secure and not falling out. I've seen these not in place, and the bottom canister is actually hanging crooked or leaking. That thing without those pins in it, the only thing holding it up is the negative pressure in your suction lines. So you want to make sure those things are in there and secure. Look for any collapsed lines. This is huge. Your mechanical room is going to get warm. It's going to be anywhere from 90 to 110 in some cases, and the suction lines on your vacuums are made out of a plastic or a silicone reinforced tubing. They can only take so much heat, and when there's a negative pressure in the line, I've seen them suck the line shut, even though it's 1.5 inches. So you want to make sure there's nothing collapsed leading to this thing. You also want to always make sure to ship off your old filter and keep record of the shipping as an extra precaution. Most manufacturers out there, when you do order a filter replacement, it's called a recycle kit. It sends you the shipping instructions, a repackaged box, a nice lid to send it off with. You print it and put it on the side and ship it right back to where it needs to go. The Henry Schein technician won't be leaving it in there. They'll box it up and get it ready for you to ship, and it's that easy. So when replacing an old vacuum for a new one, like I touched on earlier, always expect to replace this filter sooner than expected due to a better suction. When your inches of mercury go up and you're constantly doing your cleanings like you were on the older vac, you're going to see that you get a lot cleaner line with a higher suction or with the better suction with the new vac. So don't be surprised if this thing fills up after replacing your vacuum. It's always a safe idea to keep an extra filter on hand. Absolutely, absolutely. I believe in redundancy and spare parts in this because remember, it's your heart and lungs of the practice. There shouldn't be any reason to wait to the next day to replace these. They're super easy. If you want to tackle this, I have some offices in my area that tackle this, replacing this on their own. Your Henry Schein technician can show you how to do so. Consider a visual inspection log. This one's huge for your mechanical room as a whole, especially on your amalgam separator. This thing's generally 100% of the time plumbed in between your operatories and the wet or dry vac. This thing gets clogged, you start losing suction to the entire office. So have somebody walk in there and put eyes on it once a week. You can go online and print a visual inspection log from where you're getting your amalgam filter, or you can actually create your own. Just put it on a clipboard on the back of the mechanical room door, and say Sally went in there on Tuesday and checked it, and she signs off that she checked it and all is good. A quick tip is if you have foam in the canister, this could indicate soap in the lines or cleaner. Could be a crack in the canister. It could be a crack in the line. We always want to look at that upper canister probably first thing in the morning. Don't run in there and check that upper canister right after you flush the lines because it's going to go through the lower filter and it's going to take a minute for it to empty. So give it some time. Middle of the day, if you haven't flushed your lines, you more than likely would go in there and find just a little bit of a liquid in that upper canister because it takes a minute to pull it down through that lower canister through the filter and then into your vacuum tank or into your vacuum. Moving right along to compressor ventilation, I believe that's going to be you, Daniel.
Thanks, Leon. I was just typing a question in there, so I'll finish that up after this slide. Go ahead and move on to this one. So compressor ventilation, we touched on it a little bit before. For compressors, it's super important that we know where we're sucking the air from on these compressors. Dental air sources for compressors shall meet the following requirements. If the intake is located inside the building, it shall be located within a space where no chemical-based materials are stored or used. Again, you don't want to suck in some harmful chemicals or anything like that as well. If the intake is located inside the building, it shall be located in a space that is not used for patient medical treatment. You don't want to pull it from one of the other, areas where there's patients, where you've got anything going on with the patient in there at all. Obviously, that will get sucked right into the compressor. If the intake is located inside the building, it shall not be taken from a room or space in which the open or semi-open discharge from a Category 3 vacuum system. That's, we're going to have open drains, that sort of thing. Again, we talked about nitrous, anything open drain, any of that stuff. So super important that we do that. Also, I'll touch on it again with the vacuum exhaust. You don't want it near the tube, right? You don't want it to where it's sucking in that bad air right into your compressor. You'll see a lot of bad things happen with your compressor at that point. I mean, these newer compressors are built with so much better filtration systems for the air, dryers, that sort of thing, but there's no way they can compete with, I think, with a lot of that bad air that you're sucking into it. And again, you don't want to take that chance. Also in the picture, you see a little candy cane. We call it a candy cane. You don't want an open intake to where the water, rain, snow, what have you, goes down that intake into your compressor. When you have that candy cane on it, that's going to prevent a lot more moisture from coming in. And depending on if you have problems with any kind of pigeons, any of that sort of thing, I've seen screens on there as well to prevent anything from getting in there. So great idea to do that. Dental air quality. Leon, I'll go ahead and jump on this one as well since we're going through it. So the quality of air output, the quality and safety of the air produced by the compressor is the utmost important. Sprayed directly in the patient's oral cavity. When I wrote this and was reading it again, it really hit me. And I don't think we think of it enough. Maybe you do, but as far as me, I really like seeing some of the newer stuff coming out, that sort of thing, and what they're doing with it. And, looking at this chart as far as particle size in micron, it's kind of an eye-opener to see those sort of things and how small they are and how much more we depend on these compressors to keep our patients safe, right? So again, technology's changed so much over the years, and again, some of the things they have out there now, it's such better quality of the air. So keep that in mind as well. And the best way to migrate the moisture or impure air is to make sure regular maintenance is done. Again, we talked about the pink, the blue indicators. Make sure those are done. Make sure your dryers are working, that sort of thing. It's all about patient safety. You can lose time and increase dental materials failing or perhaps becoming contaminated. Keep that in mind as well. If you have some air that's not, without that moisture, if it has moisture in it. And also, it damages your handpieces. If you're seeing that you're replacing handpieces all the time or you're having issues with them, it could be that, right? I mean, that's just one more thing to look at and another thing that it can affect, let alone the compressor itself. And something else to think about is the long-term effects to your airlines. I've seen myself where we went round and round trying to find where this water is in the lines, and we replaced the compressor, that sort of thing. It was just in there. You couldn't get it out at that point. They almost had to replace some of the lines because moisture found its way in there. There's a pocket, whether it's bad plumbing, that sort of thing. You don't even want to have to deal with that. So if you keep up with maintenance, make sure it's plumbed the right way, you're going to have a lot better history there in your office with the maintenance on it too as well. So right into vacuum exhaust. The exhaust is located as follows: outdoors, right? Your exhaust has 100% outdoors. Must be 25 feet from a door, window, or intake that we talked about earlier from your compressor. Any openings to the buildings. This is to prevent anyone from inhaling nitrous from that exhaust, right? So it is pumping that nitrous. You want to make sure it's in a safe area, whether it's in a hall, an alley, up high enough to where it's not getting anybody that's walking by or hanging out in the area, that sort of thing. And it's got to be at a different level from air intakes to prevent units from taking in that exhaust air. Where prevailing winds, you got to think of that, right? If you have an open window down 25 feet and that wind is blowing that way, you got to take that in consideration, making sure that there's no one sitting there working in the lab that's externally and it's blowing right in there, that sort of thing. So it's important that all exhaust is equipped with a candy cane that we talked about earlier. You don't want that water coming back in and when the system's off, it gets pushed right back into your system and causing any kind of damage. Most of them will come with a bleeder line to where it drains inside your maintenance room. So if you do see your exhaust line in your maintenance room that has a small clear air conditioner hose or what have you that's going to your drain, that's what it is. That's a bleeder line. That's basically taking the water that's in either sucked in or dropped into your exhaust or intake, and it's going right into the drain. So you may want to check those as well. I've seen sand in them, that sort of thing. So make sure they're free flowing, put some water through them, make sure they're going good. Again, I mentioned the drip line, that sort of thing. It is important to note that some units are equipped with a cycler control that turns on your unit throughout the day, even if it's off. So if you hear your vacuum turn on, some of them are equipped to just keep them moving, that sort of thing. That being said, it's super important that you don't cut off power totally to your vacuum, and I'm talking breakers. You want to shut it off at the end of the day on the remote panel, but not the breaker. Some of the units need that cycling so they don't freeze up and cause issue for your vacuum. So make sure you're not killing the power, but shutting the remote power off. They'll do their own thing, and they're programmed a certain way to handle that. So 13. So Leon, we've got, it's everybody's favorite, right? The proper line cleaning. So he's going to go over underground vacuum lines and overhead vacuum line cleaning. I left this one to Leon because he's in the offices every day. He sees a lot more of this, and he'll give you some more tips and tricks on what to do and really the process of how to do it, right? So take it away, Leon.
Thank you, Daniel. So in my area, I have a lot of overhead plumbing, meaning overhead vacuum lines. We'll run through. I always teach all of my offices, all of my customers, how to flush overhead vacuum lines, and even if they don't have them, because if you flush with an overhead vacuum line, if you do it in an underground vacuum line, it's not going to hurt anything. But in an underground vacuum line, you're going to start with the furthest operatory from the vacuum. You're going to suck the cleaning solution mixture per the instructions on the bottle provided with the vacuum system cleaner. Then you're going to keep the cleansed vacuum lines, HVE saliva ejector, open and move to the next operatory. And then repeat steps A and B as you move through. They're pretty self-explanatory on in-ground. Overhead is where it gets a little bit touchy. In overhead plumbing, it takes 1 inch of mercury to pull 1 inch of water up 1 inch of wall. So if you have a vacuum that's set at 8 inches of mercury and you have an 8-foot ceiling, you're getting close to maxing out the pull of that vacuum. So I always tell my offices, you start closest to the vacuum. Find out where your vacuum is. Not everybody can see their plumbing overhead. You can ask your Henry Schein tech kind of where you should start, but you're going to start closest to your vacuum or mechanical room. You're going to be flushed daily. I suggest hot water if you don't want to use the cleaner daily. Use the cleaner once a week if you like, or use the cleaner once a day if you like. It's not going to hurt, but hot water is key. A lot of them require hot water even before you use the cleaner on the solution. Just make sure you're reading the instructions on the bottle. So you're going to pull your solution up through your HVEs, whether it be 1 or 2, and your saliva ejector. And once it pulls the solution, you're going to pull them off your cleaning reservoir. We're not putting these into a bucket sucking straight water, because you will actually kill a line doing it that way. But you're going to use your cleaning solutions bucket that's provided by the manufacturer, or the one you have. You're going to pull the lines off of it. You're going to set it in the holder. You can shut the saliva ejector off at that point, because we're mainly just cleaning the 5 foot of line that's going from your vacuum, your solids collection cup to your saliva ejector. And you're going to leave your HVE or HVEs open for 2 to 3 minutes. Allow those fluids to get up the wall, down. There's actually a candy cane on that line going down into what they call the trunk line. So once that fluid gets past that point, it's no longer an issue. A lot of offices will complain about hearing gurgling in the walls. If you hear gurgling in the walls during the course of a day, it is because you have overhead lines and there is water bouncing in the wall. Once you get that operatory closed, 2-3 minutes, you allow the liquids to go from the half-inch line into your trunk line. You can shut them all down, then you move to the next one. This procedure is a little bit longer, but it will ensure that you don't have anything left in your half-inch line, which is super small, that you don't want there. And it'll also ensure once you get to that very last operatory and open those lines and do the 2 to 3 minutes, it cleans that entirety of the trunk line. Believe it or not, if you start furthest away on overhead plumbing, it will actually, by the time you get to the closest to your mechanical room, it will actually push a lot of liquids back to that last operatory. So there's still stuff in that trunk line we want out of there and want into the tank and out to the drain. This is really, really important on overhead plumbing. I've seen lines have to be cut out of walls. I've seen half offices lose suction because something's broke loose, more than likely prophy-pumice, and trapped in the trunk line. Biggest misconception across the board is a hygienist, and I'm not pointing y'all out, but you use saliva ejectors all day, but you never use the HVE. Well, I never use that, so why would I flush it? It's super important to flush your lines with the HVE because it needs that volume of air to scrub that half-inch line, whether it be overhead, whether it be in the ground. It absolutely has to have that half-inch volume of air to scrub that line and get it clean like it's supposed to be. That's pretty much it on the overhead plumbing. We're going to move right into the mechanical room space. This one's a huge one for me. I'm in Texas, so it gets pretty hot in the summers here. In some cases, the mechanical room is the one room that the space is sacrificed in order to add square footage to other rooms. This is 100% the case. There's only a few instances where it has been built around the mechanical room, but this is one of those things that we got room in a closet and we just kind of put it in there. We want to make sure that there's enough ventilation. You need to allow at least 12 inches of space between the mechanical room equipment and the walls. This is going back to all of those heads that I was telling you, or pumps that I was telling you had the cooling fins on it. It's absolutely imperative that we have room around this, and we don't have a Christmas tree in July up against this thing creating an airflow restriction. I know we can't get around not having this as a storage room, but it's imperative that we try our hardest to protect our investment, right? Proper space provides room for service technicians to access equipment and for installation, maintenance, and service. You absolutely want these things accessible for your technician to come in and do your annual maintenance, or your assistant or your office manager, whoever's going to do your periodic checks to see if there's a water leak from a wet ring vac, or a air leak, or an air hose, or a ball valve that's getting shut off. Just a quick visual check, nothing around it, will make that a lot easier. You're going to make sure each room is temperature controlled. Henry Schein and our manufacturer partners recommend between 40 and 104 degrees Fahrenheit. You may also want to consider adding an industrial quality ceiling exhaust fan that can reduce temperatures. We recommend 230 CFM or higher, depending on the size of your room and what equipment you have. A lot of the manufacturers will send out the requirements prior to purchase. Your equipment salesperson will know what CFMs your equipment will need, and CFM stands for cubic feet per minute. How much volume of air is being moved through that room every minute? As you can see in the diagram there, the cool air coming across those cooling fins on that vacuum pump, and then going out that exhaust fan. Keeping your mechanical room temperature controlled can greatly increase your life of your equipment. Heat and electricity don't mix, right? They're going to get hot, but anything over the 104, you start to shorten the life of your equipment, anything electrical, everything in there. I've seen transformers in these that absolutely jump the temperature of the mechanical room up. You want to control that. I've also, in my area, they have standalone AC units that we put in those mechanical rooms that have exterior doors, where you can't really control the AC in there because, say everybody's cold in the office when it's 100 degrees outside, but your mechanical room's suffering because it's running constantly and it's not getting the ventilation that it needs. Mechanical rooms can be typically noisy. Consider soundproofing your room. Just keep in mind that you do want to control your airflow and your temperature. So when you start to soundproof them, make sure you're not cutting off louvers and doors and cracks underneath doors to knock down that airflow. If noise is a concern, most manufacturers provide sound hoods that muffle the noise, and 95% of them put cooling fans in there. So that would be really imperative that it has that 12 inches around it, so that those cooling fans for that quiet hood, if you will, has enough flow through it and to it. Never use a mechanical room as a storage unit. It doesn't matter what technician you ask. They will tell you they've seen all sorts of stuff in this mechanical room. I understand that it's a space issue, but just try to keep it in the back of your mind that we want that airflow, and we want to be able to run in there and service it at the drop of a hat during your emergencies. So keep this place as tidy as possible, if not free of anything. A quick tip is place a thermometer in your mechanical room that you can monitor and keep the temperature under control. A lot of your mechanical rooms nowadays on your exhaust fans will have a thermostat on the wall in there that's preset. A good way to test to see if it's working is to turn that down below what you feel like your ambient air temperature is, and take a tissue and tie it onto one of your broom handles. Stick it up there and to see if it sucks up against the ventilation, the vents of your exhaust fan. If it doesn't, and it should be running, there's an issue. Have an HVAC tech come out and make sure that's rectified. That will cause a lot of issues. Most of the manufacturers out there now have a readout on or a display on each piece of equipment, so you'll know what the temperature is. Heat in this room is 90% of the failures I see across the board in my area. I'm sure it would be the case in other areas, but heat and controlled temperature is a huge one. Moving on to the dental checklist.
Leon, if you don't mind, I'll go ahead and take over this one. I just want to make a quick remark. We're right at 6 o'clock, so if you all want to stay on, I'd love to continue on probably another 10, 15 minutes and then get to a couple of these questions that we have. I apologize, we're just getting into a lot of information. I know it's like drinking through a fire hose with this information, but I do want to touch on the maintenance checklist. And then up next is replace or repair, which I also want to touch base on. But Leon, I'll touch through this maintenance checklist, if you will.
Absolutely.
And kind of give an overview. The dental maintenance checklist, we talked about earlier in the presentation that this is something that you could take back to your staff. I know that I get questions from our FSBs or even doctors that I know in the field that say, hey, Dan, do you have a maintenance checklist for my staff? Just something that they need. We do. I mean, we have, I simplified it here and put it on here, and what to look for, daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly, bi-yearly, and every manufacturer's got a little tweak to some of theirs. They're a little different, but overall they're within the same range, right? You want to make sure you're doing these things as they say and keeping up with that maintenance. Things like, shut compressor, vacuum down, water solenoid off. That's daily. That should be a routine that your office is doing. Designate somebody that's in charge of that, somebody that's going to be there. If that person's not going to be there, make sure someone else is in charge of that. Make sure they are trained and they know exactly what to do and what to look for. Don't be dependent on one person. Make sure you're training the next person to back up that person when they're not there. That way it's not a missed opportunity, a missed mistake that we come up on. Inspect your compressors for unusual noises. We talked about that earlier. You're going to want to walk by it. You may not know it. You walk by it, you hear the squeal, squeak, clank. There's something going on, and you know that there's something going on because you've heard it working properly. Inspect your units daily. Walk in there at the end of the day, maybe the beginning of the day. Look for air leaks. Make sure you're looking for any kind of debris. If you see any kind of metal shavings, it's a bad situation, right? Either you got a fan that's blown, or metal head shavings, something's going on with that unit. So if you see any of that debris, have your staff, make sure they raise their hand and they're talking to you about it, and they bring be a difficult situation, but you're not going to lose production. You're not going to be down for longer than you should be. Maybe it buys us just enough time to get that head in if you're going to replace it. Repair versus replace, right? And maybe we just repair the head if it's newer, that sort of thing. Air pressures. Make sure you're checking the air pressure daily. Make sure it is shutting off. Make sure you got enough air pressure. Walk in there. Make sure it's doing what it's supposed to. Inspect your vacuum for unusual noises, like the compressor. Again, this time you're looking for water leaks. You're looking for change in suction, a reading. Ensure that the wet ring units have proper water flow. When you go in the beginning of the day, make sure you turn your water on first, then your vacuum. You don't want to turn your vacuum on, then your water. That's the hard part about a wet ring back, right? It takes that water. It takes a lot of water, but it also keeps it cool. It creates a suction, but it needs it before you turn it on because it could damage your unit. It's like running your car without antifreeze. It's going to burn it up. Weekly, you want to check the amalgam separator. We talked about that. Get a flashlight. Have one in there. And I say flashlight because sometimes it's cloudy, right? If you got all that propane paste in there and everything else, it's going to clog it up. It's going to make it hard to see, especially if you just cleaned your lines. Run a flashlight through there, your phone, what have you. Remove and replace solids filters at the vacuum. Weekly, monthly. We put weekly, monthly. It depends on the production of your office. How much production are you doing? What are you doing? How often do I need to do it? By now, you're going to have a set routine. You should, of knowing when to replace it. Look at it once in a while. See that the water's moving. See that it's not clogged. That sort of thing. Maybe you're doing it monthly now. Maybe you need to move it up to weekly, bi-weekly. Maybe when you first started your practice, you weren't doing as much as you are now. So think of those things. Am I doing more production now than I was when I first started? Do I have to increase the amount of maintenance? Do I have to do that sort of thing? Also, is my equipment getting older? Do I have to do that maintenance more often? Drain the water from the compressor tank. I put this on there. It's an older compressor tanks. You have to go in there and actually physically unscrew the brass valve on the bottom of the tank to drain the water. These are a lot of the older units that you have to do that. When you do that, I remember seeing some of our older tanks that we used to service, you'd almost see rust coming out of there because those tanks didn't have that powder coating like they do now, right? So you would see rust, and that's going into the patient's mouth. So you want to make sure that if you have that problem, we've got to look forward to the future and what you're going to put in the mechanical room. Again, check the dryness indicator. Blue is good. I think in this situation is just moisture in the line. So make sure we're constantly looking at that. It's a weekly thing, right? Change the main water line filter. Reminds me we have a question there, Leon, that you may be able to answer. You're replacing those probably more often than I am in the office, but we got a question about the water bypass filter.
Yes.
Some manufacturers recommend yearly, bi-yearly. I say unless you have a clear view of it, like some of the manufacturers have now, or one of them, you can see the sediment in there. Again, bypass it. Go past your filter, just go straight bore full to your office, and if it increases the water pressure considerably, probably got a problem in there. We got some sediment. If it's my office, I'm probably doing it yearly. I mean, for the cost of just changing it out, it's a good peace of mind just to do it, right? Instead of waiting that bi-yearly. So perform the annual maintenance on a compressor. Follow your manufacturer recommended maintenance routine. It's important. When we or whoever installs your equipment, talk to them about it. They should be talking to you about it as well and saying, okay, this is what's going to be happening. This is what you got to look for. Indicators. Again, we talked about the remote panels that have all that information on there, that sort of thing. Change your amalgam separator yearly, no matter what. Have one on hand. Buy one ahead of time. You never know. Check it. If it hits that line in 6 months, you're just doing a lot of amalgam, that sort of thing. It's got to get done. Again, it may not just be amalgam. It may be everything else, sediment in there. The inspectors, when they go to check this, they're not going to know the difference between amalgam and sediment. I've argued that case before. If it gets to that line, you got to replace it. So again, there's a lot of maintenance that you got to keep aware of. We detailed enough on here that we hope it helps you as far as that. In addition to staff inspections, sign up for a pre-scheduled maintenance to keep up with the routine maintenance. You're worried about your patients, your staff. You've got enough on your mind. Keep up with a preventive maintenance and make sure that someone's coming in regularly to check this out. I'm sure Leon's done this a million times. He's got a routine with a lot of his offices. They call him in routinely. They make sure he's there. It's another peace of mind that someone else is looking at it. I mean, you don't have time to be doing a lot of this maintenance as well. So I will jump into replace versus repair. I know this was a question on the chat as well. It's not an easy discussion, right? I think a lot of times it comes down to how much money have I already put into this unit? How much production am I doing in the life of the compressor? How out of date is my compressor or vacuum as well? I mean, I talked about the rust in the tank. That's something that old ones have. If you still had a compressor that's still taking oil, that's an older unit. You don't want to have to worry about that anymore. There's so many new ones out there that you're spending good money at that, right? Another thing to look at is a simple thing, right? Do I still have warranty? Some manufacturers, they have various warranties on their unit. You don't want a unit if a head goes bad and they still have a good warranty on it, that sort of thing. So make sure that whoever's replacing it, they're doing their homework, they're calling the manufacturer, and they're making sure there's still not a warranty on that head, and you're not paying for it. So age of unit, again, take it in consideration. I put 5 to 10 years. That's all equipment. It just, again, depends on production, depends how much you're using it, depends on the maintenance and the environment. Leon talked about Texas. I've managed Phoenix before, and now I live in Wisconsin, total extremes. And I've seen compressors and vacuums out in an outdoor maintenance closet, exposed to the 120-degree weather that you can see in Phoenix, and I've seen it down in the negatives in Wisconsin. They're getting beat up, right? I would place those easily in the 5 to 10 mark. lower end of the 5 if they're involved in exposed to the environments, right? So also reliability. Again, it's been 10 years. I have called for service on this thing every year. You know, I've replaced the head one time before, that sort of thing. You may want to look at a new one, right? If it's something that, you know, hey, I haven't dealt with this thing in a long time. It's been great. It's working good. I can, you know, do some more maintenance on it. I can do some more service. You know, a few things have gone bad. It's okay. Just make sure you have a unit that is letting you know ahead of time that it needs maintenance, or again, if it has double heads or it's big enough unit, that sort of thing too. So loss of production, take that in consideration. Is it worth that 1 day of production that if you're contemplating replacing it, you know, take that in consideration. I'm not here to advise you on the production part, but you know, you can determine what you make in a day and if it's worth replacing that compressor. If it's already on its last leg, it's already 15 years, you're going to want to look at something and determine what's important. Is it going to leave me behind in my staff, that sort of thing. So useful tip. I've seen offices do this. I've recommended it many times, but take time to evaluate your equipment annually to be able to budget your practice needs for the next year. Have a list of all your equipment. Keep track of the repairs and visits and costs. This is going to help you make that hard decision, right? And you're going to have it on detail and in a spreadsheet and say, okay, I've spent so much on this vacuum already. I've got 10 years out of it. I think I can go this year, next year, I think I'm going to budget to replace it. Those are the decisions you got to make. Talk to your staff. See what's holding them back from being productive. I mean, do we have drifting x-rays, that sort of thing? I won't get into the operatory stuff, but do I have vacuums that aren't sucking good enough? Do I have compressors that aren't blowing enough air? Am I constantly going in there and doing a service on it yourselves? Maybe you're doing something that you shouldn't have to be doing. Am I calling Henry Schein a lot for repairs, maintenance, that sort of thing, when I can have the newer system? Take those into consideration. Again, talk with your staff. If they suggest something, maybe go with it, consider it, but budget for that next year if you're up in that age group where you think you should replace it. So, sorry, I went a little fast on that because I know we're 12 minutes over. I appreciate those of you that stayed on. We've asked I think we've answered a few questions, Leon. Were you able to get to that water line filter question?
Yes, I was able to get to Mr. Park's question, yes.
Awesome. The question was, is water line filter the same as the whole house filter? You want to elaborate on that?
Absolutely. So in some cases, yes, because I see a lot of offices that will have a plumber put something comparable in. And yes, you can run down to the hardware store, Home Depot or Lowe's, and pick a filter that will fit in it just right. In other cases, the ones that our manufacturers put in there are a little bit different. They go down to a lower micron versus the ones that you can pick up down at the hardware store. So in some cases, yes, in some cases, no. And then on the size, they typically range from 3/4 to 1 inch. That's really not the size of the filter. That's going to be the size of the line. And you could tell just by taking a tape measure and holding it to the exterior of your main lines that are coming into your water filtration system. It'll tell you if you have a 1 inch or a 3/4. I believe there's a couple that are even bigger than that, some of the newer ones.
Yeah, it's something to consider when you have we've seen a lot of newer offices. You build out for 6 ops, you may have 3. Make sure you're planning for that expansion. Make sure you're working with your sales reps to make sure you let them know you're going to expand and you may need that water flow, or talk to your plumbers, that sort of thing. Make sure everybody's in the same page as far as what your future looks like and if you're going to add on to your practice, that sort of thing. Or adding another provider, right, Leon? I mean, we see too many times
Absolutely.
where you buy a smaller compressor, but then you plan on getting another provider in there, or hygiene, what have you. So make sure you're looking at that. So great. So we got another question. What if the indicator color is two-thirds blue and 1/3 pink? What do you do, Leon?
I've actually seen this one. It's 90% of the time it could be just that your indicator is old. At some point it turned pink, and then whatever was rectified to make it not put moisture into your air system, it wasn't changed, so it never turned back completely blue. That thing is in line between your compressor tank and your operatory, so any moisture is going to turn it pink. Now, Would I replace it and have it inspected? Absolutely. If any kind of pink is not good, because as Daniel alluded to, you do not want any moisture in your lines.
Yeah, and that's a good point. It may have gotten a little moisture in there. I think if you're getting a ton of moisture, it's going to turn completely pink. But if if it's slowly getting in there, it's a good flag to raise to go ahead and check it out. And better to be safe than sorry.
Absolutely, yeah. And to answer the second part that I didn't really touch on, to what to do. You just need to stay on top of your annual PMs, guys and gals. That's a huge thing. Your technician's going to check all of this when they're in there annually. You can do the checklist like Daniel and I have talked about. I tell a lot of offices, use your practice management software. When the technician's in there and services your equipment in November, put it in there for October to schedule him back out the following November. Most all manufacturers require these things to be serviced once a year. Dry vacs, there's not a whole lot. Wet ring vacs, there's not a whole lot of service on most of them. Some of them are pretty intensive. Compressors, absolutely, there's maintenance kits on those guys. So you want a technician in there once a year. There's not much that you can do on your own other than possibly replacing the wet dry indicator and see if that rectifies the issue. But you need a qualified technician in there to check your drying system to make sure it's working at 100%.
Yeah, good point. Well, I haven't seen any more questions, and we've gone over time. I really appreciate those of you that have stayed on to listen to us.
Absolutely.
It's a lot. Again, it's like a fire hose, right? You're drinking from fires at this point. And our intention was never to scare you. Like, there's tons of things going on in a mechanical room. You've got to get service in there. A lot of this is just, high level. Just get in there, look at it, listen, fill it, and replace, maintenance parts when needed. That's what it comes down to. It's so easy to walk by this mechanical room and not peek in there every once in a while. And I'm sure a lot of you do. I've met a lot of doctors and staff that really take care of their mechanical room. And they have all the best intentions, and it's great. But, make sure you're just doing those little extra steps to check a few things. It may make the difference of being down for a day or just being down for a lunch hour. So again, it was never our intention to really scare you into that, but just making you aware of it. And I hope you enjoyed this evening. And I will turn it over to Steve and close this out. Thank you all so much.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Leon. Thank you, Daniel. Really appreciate the wonderful presentation. Great job, both you guys. And thank you to all of you for joining us this evening. We did record tonight's webinar, so we'll be emailing that out to you sometime during the next week. And we'd also really appreciate your feedback. In a minute, you'll see a survey pop up on your screen, and we'd love it if you just take a minute to fill that in to let us know what you think. So once again, thank you all of us for joining. Thank you to all of you for joining us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you on future webinars. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.